welcome back, and in this segment we will be talking about the Egyptian-African relations in light of the various trips which President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi paid to various African countries, including the latest to Kenya. And joining us right now in the studio is His Excellency Ambassador Mohammad El Shazly, the former ambassador of Egypt to Sudan and member of the Egyptian Foreign Affairs Council. Good morning.
Good morning,
Ambassador.
to you.
Mr. Ambassador, Egypt had enhanced relations with Africa, especially last year. So how do you estimate the path Egypt is going through and its relation with the Black continent?
I think Egypt has always been engaged in Africa. Egypt has spearheaded the movement for independence and anti-colonialism in Africa. Egypt was one of the pivots of combating the apartheid regime in South Africa. Egypt is a founding member of the Organization of African Unity, which turned to the African Union. So this shows you that Egypt has always been aware that it is part of Africa and it has African responsibilities, and that building a common front with Africa adds strength to Egypt and adds strength to Africa.
Your Excellency, the significance and importance of the meeting which occurred on the 18th of this month between President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi and his counterpart Uhuru Kenyatta.
I think Kenya has a special importance in Africa. Kenya is a part of the Nile Basin countries. Kenya also has an important role in the fight against terrorism. It is bordering Somalia, which is witnessing instability, and it is the base of Al-Shabaab movement. All this gives a special impetus to the visit of the president to Kenya. Also, you know, the president of Kenya is the son of Jomo Kenyatta, one of the founding fathers of the Organization of African Unity. He is one of the heroes of African independence. Also, Kenya is part of the COMESA bloc, and all of this gives special weight and special importance to Kenya.
Mr. Ambassador, we are now seeing that most of the international power are shifting towards Africa. So, and they are saying that they are coming for the interest of the Black continent. So is this true? They want the interest of the Black continent, or they are seeking their own interest?
Nobody comes to the Black continent for the interest of the Black continent. Everybody comes to Africa with their own agenda. And now I think I've always said that, and I'm repeating it, that unfortunately Africa has moved from the 20th century. Instead of stepping to the 21st century, they stepped back to the 19th century. Africa in the 19th century, there was what was called the scramble for Africa. All the major powers in the world were anxious to get a piece of the cake. The Germans, the British, the French, the Belgians were scrambling to get after the raw materials and the riches of Africa. Today, in the 21st century, there is another scramble of Africa, because the major powers are very apprehensive of the rise of the economic powers of China and India in particular, and their need for raw materials, and they are afraid that there will be a shortage of raw materials, so they're all scrambling to Africa to secure their share of raw materials. The Chinese are very active, the Russians are very active, the Europeans, the Americans, and now also the Turks, the Israelis. No one of these is looking for their interest of the African continent. They are looking for their own interests.
Mr. Ambassador, how can we benefit from our African relations? Because we tend to say that we have to consolidate our efforts. A lot of visits and memorandums of understandings are being signed. But how can we actually enforce all these, let's say, goodwill?
It needs an African consensus. As I'm saying now that there is a second scramble for Africa. We, the Africans, and the Egyptians, and the third world in general, we need to interact with the Europeans, the Americans, and the whole world in order to build a strong economy. But in order to have an equitable relationship, there has to be a balance of power. If you have a relationship between a strong partner and a weak partner, the strong partner will get the better deal in the transaction. Africa, unfortunately, is in a very weak position. Yesterday or the day before, it was announced that there is a famine in South Sudan. And there is near famine in parts of Nigeria. This is, I mean, in the 21st century, in countries that have an enormous potential.
A virgin continent.
In food production and in agriculture, and they have a famine. This is tragic because there is no stability, because there is political turmoil, because there is fighting and destruction. The very weak infrastructure in Africa, instead of being enhanced by building, it is being further depleted and destroyed by war and instability. We have to have a consensus to make a solid block in front of the outside world in order to be able to survive.
Sir, being a former ambassador to Sudan, of course, you know this country very well. But if I'm going to talk about the divided part of Sudan, which is South Sudan, situation there is getting complicated every day. They reached a peace deal, and then these peace deals have been broken, and they are continuing on fighting, and there is a civil war, and as you said, there is a famine in this country. So how do you see, as a far vision opinion, the situation is going on in this country?
I have said also before, and I'm saying it again, that what we need in South Sudan is a responsible leadership. Neither the government nor the opposition have shown any responsibility. They are fighting one another for personal gains. They have turned the personal vendetta between Salva Kiir and Riek Machar into a tribal feud which is consuming the whole country. The army is not disciplined. We've had atrocities committed by the army, killings and rapes and destructions.
It's not an army, it's two tribes.
Yeah, indeed.
Everyone has his own militias.
Indeed. Last week there was another case of widespread rape in South Sudan. You cannot have leaderships that behave like this in a country. If this country wants to progress and wants to survive, I think the leaderships, both the government and the opposition, have disqualified themselves. I think there has to be a stand in Africa against this very bad situation and cycle of violence and destruction of the country.
Yes, and we will be having a phone call, taking a phone call, because today the Celestic, which is the solar phenomena of the Abu Simbel temple, where the sun enters twice a year at dawn and lights three of the statues in the Holy of the Holies of the temple of Abu Simbel, which is dedicated to the King Ramses II, who lived around 1200 BC. And in the sanctuary we have four statues. We have the statue of the god Amun-Ra, we have the statue of Ramses II himself, the god Ra-Herakhti, as well as Ptah, and it lights three of these statues and keeps that of the god Ptah in complete darkness. It's an important scientific and natural phenomena which the Egyptians managed to excel in. And joining us right now on the phone is Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbas to shed more light on that phenomena and that geniusness in architecture and design. Good morning, Mr. Samir.
Good morning, Rasha.
Would you tell us more about the significance of the solistics that takes place annually, twice a year, when the sun enters and sheds light on three of the statues in the Holy of the Holies of the temple of Ramses II at Abu Simbel?
So first of all, there is different theories about these events, and the most common is that is the birthday and the coronation days. That's happening 2 times a year, as you know, and that's the first time is the coronation. The other one is the birth of the Pharaoh Ramesses, and the other one is the coronation. So it's but I think that which is even more important is to highlight the importance of the area, and Abu Simbel temples as a unique symbol in Egypt here has been sculptured or cut from one single rock, from one mountain. And that was a miracle of engineering when it was happened 3,300 years ago. And again, another miracle for moving the temples, not only Abu Simbel temple, the Queen temple of Nefertari, and many of the other smaller temples built by the ancient Egyptians along the Nile Valley in the Nubian land. So the location where Abu Simbel is built is very remote, even for the ancient Egyptians back in that time. And that will lead to another interesting topic about the ancient Egyptian civilization contribution to the Nubian. And for your information, which is a very interesting information, is only 30 minutes from Abu Simbel across the Sudanese border in Wadi Halfa, and another hour drive, you reach Sai Island, which is full with monuments as well, and very much connected with the ancient Egyptian civilization. I hope we can put more light on not only the Nubian temples or the ancient Egyptian temples on Nubian land inside the Egyptian land, but also there is an extension for these monuments on the other side of the border, and that's only an hour and a half driving from Abu Simbel, Sai Island, and Sullivan. Many other temples still in well preserved and still in good conditions, but hardly anybody make it there. I wish we can use an event like that for starting a new strategy for promoting for people to visit the monuments in both sides, in Egypt and Sudan, and making the regulations of traveling, which is easier, and that will bring more people to visit Egypt and Sudan all together.
Mr. Samir, this important event that takes place only once a year, and it attracts the attention of the whole world. So, according to your information, how many people witnessed such an event this year?
So in the time being, actually, I'm not in Abu Simbel now, but it's quite common to have like at least hundreds of people, which is going on attending the events. And the good thing about what's happening there is it is not only people. They are not only going for the sun celebration festival, but also there is a folk show which is organized by the community there. There is 2 shows has been organized at the plaza in front of the temple. Shortly after the sunlight show, there is a folk show, and that makes the event is very unique and attracts the attention of many people. And the good thing is it's not only a touristy, because there is another event which is held for the local community there, which is even could be more interesting than the touristy one, which is held shortly after in the evening.
Well,
Well, yes, I'd like to ask you about the temples themselves. Would you please tell us more about these two temples, because they are actually two important temples, and one of them, which is that, and each, like Ramses II's temple, has unique scenes inside which are dedicated to that particular temple. Also, the Nefertari section as well has unique images. So would you shed some light on the most important, let's say, scenes that are different than in any other temple concerning the two temples of Abu Simbel?
So the temples of Abu Simbel, and more specified, the big one of Ramesses II, is exceptional temple in Egyptian architecture. When you compare it with the other temples, like in Karnak and Luxor temple, and the other temples along the Nile, from Aswan and north of Aswan, you will find that hardly the pharaoh has been represented in this huge, big statues at the temple gate. Not only so, the decoration itself. The decoration normally inside the Egyptian temples, you don't see a wall decoration. The wall decorations, the battle decorations, is outside of the temple, not inside the temple. But Abu Simbel temple is exceptional because it was cut from a rock, not being built. It is more specified sandstone rock. Second, the pharaoh has been introduced like as a four-seated big statues, more than 20 meters height each one, as the temple facade, that's not common as well. Third, the army scene, which is of Ramesses II and his victory over the Hittites, introduced inside the temple, and that is not common as well. And the fourth thing, the four important characteristic of the temple is in the innermost part, the Holy of the Holies. The Holy of the Holies is not dedicated to the god Amun-Ra or other gods like most of the other temples along the Nile Valley, but dedicated to different gods: Amun-Ra, Rahur Akhti, Betah, and Ramesses himself, which is not common. Ramesses himself, he introduced himself equal to the gods. I think that the exceptional here is it was built in a Nubian land. It was built to attract the Nubian attention. So they believe in the ancient Egyptian king god and the ancient Egyptian king as a god, and that was the main reason why it was built like that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Egyptologist Mr. Samir Abbas, for this phone call, and we continue our interview with His Excellency Ambassador Mohammad El Shazly. And as we
can I make a small addition?
Yes, please. Of course, Your Excellency.
This year we celebrate, I think, the 200th anniversary of the discovery of the Abu Simbel temple by the Swiss archaeologist Burckhardt. The Swiss archaeologist Burckhardt died in Egypt, and he is buried in Egypt. And also this year is the 50th anniversary of transforming and saving the Abu Simbel temples by the great effort done by the late Dr. Sarat Okasha. I think we could pay him tribute.
Sir, you're interested in archaeology as well.
I am. And also one of the things that we should mention about Abu Simbel, when the ancient Egyptians built the temple, they built it so as the sunlight illuminates the statue of Ramses II on his birthday and on his coronation day.
Yes.
When the temple was removed by the modern Egyptians and transferred to higher ground to save it from the floods of the high dam, we kept this phenomena, and we still, the sun illuminates Ramses' face on these two occasions.
Well, actually we have more time, so before we return back to politics, I'd like to make use and benefit from your archaeological knowledge. Your Excellency, so have you been to Abu Simbel? Definitely you have.
I have been to Abu Simbel, and I advise every Egyptian, and indeed everybody in the world, to visit. It is one of the most beautiful temples. It is one of the temples that keeps most of the color of the murals. Mm-hmm. If most of the other temples, if you go to Karnak, for instance, you hardly find any color remaining in the murals. In Abu Simbel, the color is still there, intact, and it is the artistic beauty of the temple is beyond description.
Something that will never be repeated again, these archaeological sites and monuments in Egypt. one of the wonders
Indeed.
of the world, not only the pyramids, but I believe every monument we have, it's one of the wonders in the world.
Indeed.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador, back to the African-Egyptian relations, and this black continent is suffering. But on the other hand, we see reports and read reports that it's moving forward, and they're discovered every now and then oil, diamond, gold, and so on, so on, so. But on the real ground, the people of this black continent still suffering. So, how this goes with that?
First of all, Africa is one of the richest continents in natural resources. But all this is not showing in the country because of the instability, the political strife, the civil wars, the division between the tribes, and all this. In addition to corruption, the last African summit was dedicated to two titles: fighting corruption and empowering the younger generations. And I think this was a very courageous step by the Africans to admit that there is corruption in the country, in the continent.
Yes.
In Africa, corruption takes a different dimension. We have never heard in any other continent of people like Idi Amin, of people like Bukaki, who squandered the gross national produce of his country for his coronation festivities. We don't find people like Mobutu, who has depleted his country of its resources. So I think the first step to combat a disease is to recognize the disease. The Africans very courageously have recognized and admitted of this scourge, corruption. And I think taking a stand against corruption is a very important step towards the well-being of the continent. And also, the future is the younger generations. If you invest in the younger generation, you will have a better future.
Your Excellency, during the last year, exactly during the month of December, there were two important meetings. The first was President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi visiting Ethiopia. The second was President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi receiving his Ugandan counterpart in Egypt. How do you see these two important meetings of these two important, or actually they are three important leaders at such a time?
Indeed, Ethiopia, of course, is a major country in the Nile Basin. So is Uganda. In the case of Ethiopia, we have a problem. We have a deep problem with Ethiopia, and we are trying to solve this problem amicably. If this problem is not solved amicably, it will throw the whole Nile Basin and indeed the whole continent into a state of instability. We are doing everything in our power to solve this crisis in an amicable way.
Yes.
Also, Uganda is also a very important country in the Nile Basin group, and we are trying to build bridges with the whole of the Nile Basin groups, especially within Africa, because this is the group that affects Egypt most.
Ambassador Mohammad El Shazly, we always hear statements from the African Union every now and then, but we don't see any actions from this institution. So what is the role, what they are doing?
the African Union, the Arab League, the United Nations are organizations that reflect the needs and the determination of their countries. There is no African Union as an organization that is independent of the will of the member states. Africa, as I told you, and also the Arab League, we are two of the areas on the globe that are most backward. If you look at the poorest country in the world, you'll find them that they are Arabs and Africans. If you look at stability, you'll find that most unstable countries in the world are Arab and African. If you look at literacy, you'll find that the highest illiteracy rates are in the Arab and the African countries. If you look at the health standards, you'll find that the lowest health standards in the world are in Arab and African countries. Therefore, I was very optimistic when we had lately the Arab African summit, because there are points where we meet and there are issues that we could cooperate together against. Unfortunately, it was sabotaged by the Moroccans and the stance they took over the Saharan Republic, which I think is a very deplorable thing, because the Arabs need the Africans and the Africans need the Arabs.
Well, actually, it's a topic that we need to dwell on more, but unfortunately, I have to thank you very much. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, Ambassador Mohammad El Shazly, the former Ambassador of Egypt to Sudan, as well as member of the Egyptian Council of Foreign Affairs. Thank you very much for this.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And now we are moving to a quick break, so please stay tuned.